is Steve Laffey's Fixing America. And now, broadcasting live from the Fixing America Command Center in Fort Collins, Colorado, here is your host, Steve Laffey.
Hey, good afternoon. Steve Laffey here. Steve Laffey's Fixing America here on LaffeyRadio.com. It's Newsday Tuesday, the day of the week. We do most every Tuesday where we take a lot of different topics and try to solve problems or just sometimes point things out to people that they don't even hear about, don't even know. Happens all the time. We're at LaffeyRadio.com. Facebook, we're at Laffey Radio. Thanks so much for liking us there. Follow us on Twitter. Tomorrow we'll be out with another Fixing America Presents series we put out every Wednesday. The Laffey Minute goes up Monday through Friday every morning. These are things that you can use, we can use. I want to tell you, before we get started, I want to tell you I showed the movie, the earliest showing of Fixing America, the movie at FixingAmericaMovie.com, movie that we made in 2011, showed all the way through 2012. Even at the end of 2013, it still seems to find a lot of relevance with different people. But I never showed the movie at 7 o'clock in the morning. So this morning, in Loveland, Colorado, in front of one of the greatest groups of Americans you'll ever find, I showed the movie at my church. And there was a lot of people there. It was great. It was great to see that. I haven't watched it myself. You know, when you create something, this show, I'll watch the show tonight, and I have a tough time watching myself on these shows. Hopefully you don't, but I do. Just self-critical stuff. But in watching the movie, the people, you've got to watch Fixing America. Go get a copy of it at Amazon or go to FixingAmericaMovie.com. I don't always cross-promote, but, if Bill O'Reilly can write history books, you can go watch a documentary movie about yourself, about America, and how people desperately want to fix it. It moves me every time, gets me psyched up no matter how tired I am or whatever I'm doing. But it was a great moment this morning. People had great questions afterwards, as always. People just so care about this country that they get up and get there and watch a movie at 7 o'clock in the morning. I mean, the early morning show, around here is like 10:30 for the Saturday, whatever the hot movie is. Before we get into these topics, though, I want to talk to you about baseball. A lot of things have happened recently in the last week or so, and I think I'm just going to make it official. I think I'm just going to throw the towel in. I grew up a Yankee fan, and that's because even though I grew up in Rhode Island, although in Cranston around, more than half the people are Yankee fans. People don't understand it's a highly Italian-American background of many people, great Americans who love Joe DiMaggio. That's their guy. And you go into campaigning houses, you'll see Joe DiMaggio. So that was not my deal. I'm an Irish-American. I'm American, but my ancestors are from Ireland. And so I didn't know that was not my reason. I just happened to be reading books in 1966 when I was 4. So Bart Starr, the Green Bay Packers, the Yankees, the Celtics, those are the teams that I rooted for, and I never changed, even though I grew up in Rhode Island. Of course, now I root for the Denver team, which is, by the way, if you're listening from all over the country, I've been to many ballparks. The nicest place to go to a ball game is in Denver. The people who work there are the nicest people. They get you the right tickets. People in the stands move around. No one's throwing beer around. I mean, Yankee Stadium, Fenway Park, I've been to many a game, not doing anymore. But here's what I want to just make a comment on. Jacoby Ellsbury gets free agent, big star for the Red Sox, just won the World Championship, and he's going to play for the Yankees. I'm not going to root for him. I'm not doing this anymore. Baseball, with the steroids that they don't admit, even though they don't vote him into the Hall of Fame, baseball won't even put a World Series game on so little kids can watch it on the East Coast. Baseball just won't do what needs to be done. And you see people like Robinson Cano just left the Yankees for a contract that'll take him up to be 40 years old. And you can see, by the way, this is nothing about competitive federalism as it pertains to Major League Baseball players. We talked about competitive federalism last year. I hope Matt Mayer's listening over at the Liberty Foundation. But, think about it. Washington State has no income tax. The guy makes $25 million a year in either state. It's like an extra $2 million plus, given the city and local taxes they're going to nail you with in New York. So it's like an extra 10% per year that Robinson Cano can make working in Washington State. I believe they don't have a state income tax. They didn't for many years. I'm sure they don't. And there's no Major League Baseball team in Wyoming, so he can't play for the Cheyenne Stampede, whatever you want to call it. He can't go there. He could go to Florida, I suppose. But So, but I think I'm just done. I think I'm going to make it a public announcement. I'm not rooting for Jacob Ellsbury. And I guess with the retirement of the greatest guy I ever, Rivera, the relief pitcher, the classiest ball player maybe who ever played. Maybe that's it. Maybe we should just all call it quits, because it really is about, the tickets are too expensive. I mean, how does a family of four go to these games? I really don't know. Heck, I look for these cheap tickets. And I go down once a year now. I think I might go down once a year. But now it's about like the history of baseball. It's not about rooting for the teams anymore. Forget it. Just forget it. The other thing I wanted to bring up, though, and this is why sometimes I like to get into this. I have the Wall Street Journal from yesterday with me, and it doesn't amaze me. It just, they own the newspaper. They can put whatever they want on the front cover, right? They can decide which news. And this show, by the way, is a lot about sort of the propaganda, the things that you hear that aren't really true, where you're getting your news sources from. We're going to talk a lot about that, whether it's Russia or China, or what happened with Putin just literally hours ago, as he just took down another news agency in Russia. But you pick up the newspaper and you have to go to page A12 at the bottom right hand for a small article, a tiny article, which should be on the front page of every newspaper, with China posts the biggest trade surplus in nearly 5 years as exports rise. And the way they write this article, it's the same article written every month, every year. And I don't think the American people, I don't think we get it. China's surplus rose to $33 billion from $31.1 billion the month before. Exports are up 12%, et cetera, et cetera. Imports grew a modest 5%, bringing the imbalance to the U.S., blah, blah, blah. Okay, for $22 billion for the month. Now listen to this next paragraph. A persistent trade surplus has been a source of contention between Beijing, and that's in China, communist China, and Washington, and that's in America, and has fed China's accumulation of $3.66 trillion trove of foreign exchange reserves as the end of the third quarter. Well, first of all, what's the source of contention? Where's that? Where are the U.S. representatives? Where are the senators? Where's the president? Joe Biden, the vice president, was just over there. Was that a source of contention? Did anybody do anything about it? No. Yet the article every month, every year, for 10 years gets written as if there is a source of contention. There is no source of contention. The American multinational companies who operate out of China lobby strongly for the U.S., for your U.S. representative, for your U.S. senator, and for your president to say nothing about it. They just put it in the article, so when you read it, I think the Wall Street Journal is pretty much behind the free trade, or I shouldn't say free trade, the imbalance of trade with China. They think it's a good thing. And of course, by the way, China, another story that's not really in the news, China is expelling journalists who do a good job, journalists who actually report the news. They got to get out by the end of December. And we put up a little protest about that. Another source of contention. But it's not a source of contention. We just put up with it, watching it get stronger every day. But the article goes on. It's a very, very short article. It should be on the front page. It should be in everybody's mind. People should be inflamed about it. The strong export numbers comes as a surprise after South Korea, who's another country nearby, right, whose manufacturers serve to markets similar to China's, registered a 0.2% year-over-year export growth. So everybody's surprised. China's exports, once the major engine of the economy, had suffered since the global financial crisis. A gradual recovery in the developed world in recent months has brightened the outlook. Chinese exports to Europe were up 18% and 17% to Europe and U.S., respectively, compared with the same month a year ago. Does that make any sense either? Does that sound like a gradual recovery in the recent months has brightened the outlook? It's like it should be rephrased that it's a torrid, T-O-R-R-I-D, torrid pace of exports. Combine that with China, by the way, just the other day, just announced their own cash for clunkers. That it's cash for boats. The boat building has lots of excess capacity. China's like the second biggest builder of boats in the world. And they need to close down a couple of them. People need to go bankrupt. But guess what? They're owned by the state, by the country, by communist China. So they're just giving them a 40% discount like we did on buying cars back in 2009. It's ludicrous. It's not even in the news. And I think this is... I don't know. I mean, there isn't another news source other than, I guess, here that talks about it in such a way. So hopefully people will start to understand before it's too late. These things that are happening are not, there is no point of contention. There is no giant argument. Joe Biden went over there, and we'll play some more from Joe Biden later when we come back from the third break about the air defense identification zone we've talked about. But there is no seemingly point of contention. If there was, somebody in Congress, at least the majority of the Republicans, would impose trade sanctions on communist China today over a lot of things they've been doing. But we don't. Anyway, by the way, we're going to talk about former leader of South Africa who died recently, Mandela. We'll do a whole show on him, but not today. But the leaders of the free world, the leaders of the communist world, everybody's over in South Africa today. And just a couple of hours ago, it looks as though Obama went up to Castro, not Fidel, but his brother Raul, and had a nice little smile, seemed to, in a video that I watched, seemed to bow his head a little bit. We know he does that to foreign dictators. He does that when he visits with the Saudi Arabian princes. And no president should be doing this. And no president should be shaking the hand. So he shakes his hand and smiles like they're old friends. He's shaking hands and smiling with a man who puts to death and still holds American hostage, but puts to death so many people over so many years. Torture, death. He should punch him in the gut. No, I say that facetiously. He shouldn't be punching anybody in the gut. But figuratively, it should be that he's not going anywhere near this guy. But our president, now I know other presidents have done this too. I think Clinton shook hands with Fidel Castro. Sorry, I could be wrong about that. So McCain, John McCain, who I have a lot of differences with, but a man, even though he attacked me viciously when he came into Rhode Island years ago, and we chatted about it later, he and I, in 2008, because he was a big defender of Lincoln Chafee for the United States Senate. But he had some comments on it. And he says the truth. This is John McCain who, you know, once again, when he gets it right, he gets it right. He says, quote, it gives Raul some propaganda to continue to prop up his dictatorial, brutal regime. That's all. McCain said of the handshake between the two world leaders that took place at the memorial service for Nelson Mandela. When asked if Obama should have extended his hand, McCain was quick to respond. Of course not, the senator said. Why should you shake hands with someone who's keeping Americans in prison? I mean, what's the point? And then McCain said Neville Chamberlain shook hands with Hitler. So it's Barack Obama's lack of foreign policy. We can see this in everything we talk about in foreign policy, whether it's what we just talked about in China, not so much obviously in baseball, but what we talked about in China, or what he does on a daily basis with world leaders. They don't seem to respect him. It seems to be a situation where he's going to make these central powers, or these, whatever you want to call the rising authoritative axis, as some people call it, he wants to make them stronger and make our allies weaker. And it was talked about when he first ran for president, when he first became president. That was his policy, and people couldn't believe it. It looks as though that's what it is. But you don't shake hands with Raul Castro, nor do you punch him in the gut. You just let it be known he's over on the other side of the room, and you don't go near him. You're all there for the same purpose, and you stay away. Anyway, Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We're going to come back with some more propaganda out of Russia as we talk about Ukraine. And by the way, I just realized you can't call it the Ukraine. That happened I didn't know this, by the way. You got to call it Ukraine, so I got to change my language. They changed all that. I used to call it the Ukraine because it was part of the Soviet Union. We called it the Ukraine. Now it's just Ukraine. And how this really is a gigantic situation in world politics today. And I've talked about how Ukraine is so important geographically for Europe, for the world, and how we can deal with Putin and deal him a blow if we play our cards right. But it's Steve Laffey. Steve Laffey's Fixing America at LaffeyRadio.com. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
The call to serve. It has no sound, yet I have heard it in the whispered retelling of honorable sacrifices made by those who have served before me. The call to serve has no form, yet I have clearly seen it. In the eyes of men and women infinitely more courageous and more driven than most. The call to serve has no weight, yet I have held it in my hands. I will commit to carry it close to my heart until my country is safe and the anguish of those less fortunate has been soothed. The call to serve is at once invisible and always present. And for those who choose to answer the call, for their country, for their fellow man, for themselves, it is the most powerful force on earth. America's Navy, a global force for good.
There's hundreds of fun and simple things you and your family can do to live a healthier lifestyle. Here's 20 of them. Eat less, eat slower, eat smarter, eat your fruits and veggies. Stop eating before you're full. Up your fiber, lower your calories, get off the bus early, do some gardening, do jumping jacks, take the stairs, take one, not two, take on a new sport, take a long walk home, walk instead of drive, bend, stretch, reach for the stars, climb the monkey bars, skip the fudge bars. Search We Can online to find more ways you and your family can get healthy together. A message from the Ad Council, HHS, and NIH's We Can program.
I'll pick you up after school. Okay, I got it.
It's easy to take a day for granted. You and your family are connected by routine, and you stick to it. But what if a disaster strikes without warning? What if life as you know it has completely turned on its head? What if your day's routine is disrupted and you can't reach your family? Have you planned for that? Before a disaster turns your family's world upside down, it's up to you to be ready. Get a kit, make a plan, be informed. Today. Learn how at www.ready.gov. Ready.gov. This message brought to you by the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the Ad Council.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
Earlier, hundreds of thousands of demonstrators had packed out the main square. They demanded the government resign for rejecting closer ties with the EU in favor of better relations with Russia.
These are the demands of Ukrainian people that fight for justice and for their freedoms and liberties.
Some government supporters did make it onto the street. There were long rows of riot police to protect them. The pro-Europe protests are continuing. But Ukraine's security service says it's investigating some of the opposition leaders on suspicion of planning a coup. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Kiev.
Steve Laffey here. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. Thanks for coming back. It's Newsday Tuesday at LaffeyRadio.com. And we appreciate you listening. We appreciate you following us on Facebook and liking us on Twitter and spreading the word around, especially through word of mouth and also through some of the clips we produce, whether it's the Fixing America Presents, the Laffey Minute, and the shows that we put up. And this show, which is live, we'll put it up again, within 20, 30 minutes. We'll put it up there so you can listen to it on the way home. And we have many people, by the way, who are listening to it on their apps. We have a self-loading app that I should mention more often. You can just get in your car, turn on your iPhone or whatever device, type in LaffeyRadio.com. It becomes an app. And you just hit the button and you start listening to the show. Drive home, and instead of listening to people screaming and yelling about how everybody else is terrible in the other party, you can listen to us talk about some of the major problems of the day, like yesterday when we talked about solving a problem with the Department of Energy, which I was overwhelmed with how badly it's run, the major misses on anything it's trying to do, the kind of corruption that goes on within it, the investigations that lead nowhere. Anyway, we could talk about that. But that's Russia, and that's the Ukraine. And that's Ukraine, I should say. and that's Western Europe, right in that clip, all kind of coming together. And before we play some of these sort of propaganda clips, I wanted to, you got to remember again, why is Ukraine so important and why is today so important? They had their Orange Revolution in 2005, and their leaders were sort of deposed. One is actually sitting on a hunger strike. Former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko is on a hunger strike, and they're trying to get her out. That's how all these things started to happen. And I know it's not in the news in the way it should be, but Americans should know what's going on in other parts of the world. And the situation in Ukraine is huge. If we can get Ukraine get it into Western Europe, and Western Europe has many problems, but out of the range of Putin, we have done more good for foreign policy and more to hurt Russia than we could do in Syria in the next 3 years. You have to understand how Russia views Ukraine. It would be akin to America losing California, more so than losing Alaska. It would mean for our national security purposes, we would feel like, oh my gosh, a bunch of communists took over California. Some think they already have, but seriously, some other country took over California hypothetically, and they're looking right in on our country. We're blessed to have these oceans, friendly neighbors to the north and south. But it's vitally important. It's going to Russia to spend an enormous amount of money. By the way, Russia today, Putin just closed down, this happened a couple of hours ago. Not in response to this, but they closed down their largest news agency, RIA Novosti. It's been around for 50 years. It was actually trying to promote and publish some normal news, and he just closed it down. He's going to replace it with he's going to replace it with a new agency called Russia Today, and a guy named Dmitry Keselev is going to run it. Keselev is known for his ultra-conservative views, including saying that gay people should be banned from giving blood and their hearts should be burnt rather than used in transplants. Okay. So he's the guy in charge now putting out Russian news. We're going to play you some clips, though, out of Russian television. And sometimes, by the way, you can get decent news out of Russian television or France news and so forth, because they're reporting on things around the world. But listen to some of the clips about Ukraine and what's happening today. These are longer clips, but it's like total propaganda. And they're trying to put it into the mainstream news as if it really is a news, but it's not. Listen to the Russian propaganda minister just being asked questions and not having a retort or interruption, just to go on forever.
Ukraine with Mateusz Piskorski, director of the European Center of Geopolitical Analysis. Mr. Mateusz Piskorski, welcome to RT. It's good to talk to you now. So it looks like Ukraine is pretty much divided country now, with the West traditionally more pro-European, more pro-European integration with the Europe, and the East historically more pro-Russian. Do you think that opposition leaders are trying to have some sort of a dialogue with the Easterners?
No, I guess that first and foremost, all the protests which we can now see in Kiev, in the central squares and streets of Kiev are, let's say, protests which have been raised or supported by some external factors, by some external actors of the Ukrainian political scene. First and foremost, we see a huge professionalism of those who have organized the protests. Before the protests, we have heard about the activities of several embassies and NGOs financed and supported by different countries, by foreign countries. So we see that this is a kind of pressure exerted by external forces for the Ukrainian government, for the Ukrainian authorities, to think once again about the choice, which geopolitical choice, which geo-economical choice would be right and better for Ukraine. Of course, as you've told, we can of course see also the protests organized by the other side, by the Ukrainian Communist Party, by some members of the Party of Regions, which are in the eastern and southern towns of Ukraine. Unfortunately, here in Europe and in the United States as well, we see only what's happening now in Kiev, but we cannot see the reaction of other part of Ukraine, of the southern and eastern part of Ukraine.
So So without interruption for like 2 minutes, the Russian, I can't pronounce his name, but the man representing Russia's interest, I love it when he says, let's say, I can't do that accent, but let's say, he talks about the external factors, the professional mobs, the foreign countries which are involved. It just goes on and on with no interruption. It's amazing. And then I think to myself, well, wait a second. On some of these news channels in America, people just go on and on saying total nonsense and no one interrupts them. So I have to stop myself once in a while and say, well, that happens a lot in America. You know, when Barack Obama goes on and on about some topic, no one even stops him. You know, whether it's 60 minutes or whatever it might be, they just don't stop him. They just let him go on, say whatever he wants. And don't interrupt him, don't question him later. This interview goes on, by the way. We'll play a couple more clips. We have time before the break, but here's the next clip of this propaganda minister.
But we've seen Polish politicians were cheering protesters there. And let's now listen together with you to what was said. Just one quote.
You are part of Europe and we will support you forever.
So European politicians taking part in anti-government protests in another country, what's your take on this?
First and foremost, I don't know if those politicians from Poland had the right to speak on behalf of Poland and on behalf of the Polish authorities, because as far as I know, no one, neither the president, neither the prime minister, have entitled them to speak and voice the Polish opinion, the Polish official opinion about the events in Kiev. Second, I don't know if Mr. Protasiewicz had the right to speak on behalf of European Parliament, because as far as I know, European Parliament has also not voted for any, let's say, one-sided resolution which would be in support of excuse me, of those protesting now on the Square of Independence. So I think this is rather a kind of private or individual initiative of some of the Polish politicians. We also know that the leader of the biggest opposition party from Poland, Mr. Kaczyński, the leader of Law and Justice Party, also visited Kiev those days. So I think they are trying to get some more political attention rather here in Poland for the Polish public opinion than to earn some points on the international arena. So I wouldn't really seriously worry about their speeches, but of course their speeches are, let's say, at least intolerable if we look at the point of view of the diplomatic relations between the two countries. If we look at it from the point of view that Mr. Protasiewicz is the deputy speaker of European Parliament, and he hasn't had the right to voice the opinion of the whole European Parliament, I guess.
So Mr. Protasiewicz is the deputy speaker of the European Parliament, but we heard in that clip from the Russian gentleman that he has no right basically to speak on behalf of Europe, no right to speak on behalf of Poland, and that basically he's trying to get political. This is what they always do, by the way, trying to get political attention. He's trying to get political attention for his country of Poland. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And then I stop again. And I say, I can remember when I was in politics back in Cranston, where people would just go on and on this kind of a radio show or on a TV show and say, oh, Steve Laffey is just trying to get attention for himself. It's nothing serious. And who is he to speak for blah, 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 blah. And at the end, reporters would say nothing. Absolute nothing. But the major point before we take our next break is that Ukraine is exceedingly important. America is seemingly doing nothing about it. We're not offering any encouragement. We're not doing anything when this is like a battle that we can actually win. The people of Ukraine, they want to live free. They want to be part of this Western culture. They want to be part of democracy. They don't want to live under the tyranny of Putin. And we've got to help them. You know, it's so strategically important in that country. Energy, so much energy comes to Russia through the Ukraine that of course, people are scared for Ukraine and the people of Ukraine that they'll cut that off. Europe's afraid they'll cut it. That's why Germans sometimes turn their back on Ukraine and go with Russia on this. We've got to find a way. Let's find a solution for it. That's what foreign policy is about. We're not doing any of that today. Steve Laffey will take a quick break at LaffeyRadio.com. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We appreciate you listening in. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
Students, when I call the reason for your absences throughout the years, please exit the auditorium without your high school diploma. Too tired. Family trip. Sick day. Starting the holidays early.
Starting in the 6th grade, students who miss 18 days or more of school in a year for any reason will fall behind and risk not graduating high school. How many days of school has your child missed this year? Absences add up. Keep track at boostattendance.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Army and the Ad Council.
Well, I finally did it. My student loan is totally paid off.
What? What about our plan to win the lottery and start living? You know, travel the world on matching yachts, wear enough jewelry to require a bodyguard, vacation on the French Riviera, and then buy it.
You know we're never going to win the lottery, right?
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs, the Colorado Society of CPAs, and the Ad Council.
Picture this, your next trip, Utah, 5 national parks. First, Zion. You're walking, the ground rises, the ground drops, the ground becomes water. Next, Bryce. You're riding a mule. You're riding a mule under giant orange drip castles. You are not dreaming. You will not forget this. On to Capitol Reef. Take the scenic route, the really scenic route. Take a path you've never taken and see the stars for the first time. Now for Canyonlands. You're riding a bike. You're riding a bike on Mars. Now you're riding the rapids. Class 2, Class 3, Class 4, Classic. Arches, 5:32 a.m. Some things are worth racing the sunrise for. The horizon lightens. You round the corner. Whoa. This is Life Elevated. The Mighty 5. 5 iconic parks, 1 epic experience. Plan your trip at visitutah.com.
It's 6:42 p.m. Time for Steve Plotto and his son Dylan to do the dishes. They talk about everything from the yuckiness of girls to the awesomeness of his soccer team. Sometimes they don't talk at all. Then, hey! The dreaded splash fight. It's Dad o'clock, and it's the best time of the day. Because the smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today. Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
It's a matter of, is it a matter of lying?
Yes, and they knew it when they did it. That's what really offends me. Chris is dead on, and the fact of the matter is, probably one of the most important decisions I made was I had exactly 2 doctors who covered me over that 35-year period of time. And that was crucial in terms of my care. And that's true in an awful lot of cases, especially people who have chronic diseases. What they said was, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, you can keep your insurance policy, and it was a lie. It was deliberate. They knew if they told the truth, the bill would have never passed. So
Steve Laffey here, back with Steve Laffey's Fixing America. Thanks for tuning in on this another cold morning in northern Colorado. It's going to start warming up into the 20s, though, so we should be okay. But anyway, it's Newsday Tuesday, and it's kind of a fun show. We do a lot of different topics. We've taken on a lot of different so far. Maybe we'll get back to this thing about Russia and propaganda and Ukraine and so forth. But you just heard a clip. That was obviously former Vice President Dick Cheney calling President Obama a liar over the fact that you could keep your doctors. It's obviously very vitally important to Dick Cheney, who had a whole series of heart problems throughout a long period of time. He went through it in his book. He went through it in a lot of different places. He's talked about it. And you can see him, he's ticked off, as a lot of Americans are. And even now, today, there's been a lot written about how much power the presidency has taken on over the years. It's called the imperial presidency. And there was testimony last week from a bunch of left-of-center individuals who were young, who would so forth so they could actually stay. He started enforcing the DREAM Act, even though it failed Congress several times. The IRS situation. using the IRS to attack people from other parties who disagree with you. Done nothing about that. And of course, this individual health insurance program where he just announces one day after Bill Clinton, I guess, who really is still the president in some respects, after Bill Clinton says everybody should be able to keep their policy, he says, yeah, you keep your policy. And the state insurance commission is like, how do we do this? We already planned on this not happening. And then there's really no follow through. But people take as much power as you let them, or as they can get away with for the most part. And it's the failure of our Congress to stop this. Though I just gave you 4, there's probably a dozen more. But 4 things that have happened in the last, several years that get people talking about the imperial presidency in a way that makes you worry. I had one gentleman this morning ask me, should the next president, I'm paraphrasing what he said, who's going to do the right thing, take even more power to do the right thing? And I said, no, of course not. It's going to take the people listening to the show, the people of America, the people that I've met across this country, starting to unite in a grassroots area, in a grassroots way, to get to Washington like they are in Ukraine today, and not leave until we get these changes that we need, like a balanced budget, like a proper foreign policy, like things that we can all agree upon. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take us, the people. But this is a very, very serious situation. And I don't see President Obama stopping it at all. We want to get to, there's so much more to get to we won't get to today, but I did want to talk to you about what happened yesterday. Well, yesterday, I guess it was. New Hampshire Congressman Kuster says Libya is not in the Middle East and won't answer any questions on Benghazi. You have to listen to this clip. Listen to it carefully. This is Representative Ann Kuster, Democrat out of New Hampshire. She's at one of these town hall meetings, which are becoming far and few between. But listen to this her version of how to answer questions from the public.
Okay, first, can you please let me know your position on House Resolution 36 that will authorize the Select Committee to get to the bottom of Benghazi? I don't have that. It's a Senate, I think. I don't think we have anything about that in the House.
Yes, you do.
Yes, and this is also in Benghazi. So,
can you address Benghazi? What are you going to do about Benghazi? Why isn't Benghazi at the top of your issue?
Well, I'm certainly not here to talk about it. We're here to talk about the Middle East.
That is the Middle East.
Libya is like in the middle of the Middle East.
Benghazi is the Middle East.
That's Africa.
We don't want to get this. There are a lot of different ideas and a lot of different opinions here. The Congressman was nice enough to share a trip with Israel and answer questions on the topic and have a civil discussion. That's why we have the postcard. So we're going to stick to the format of answering questions that rather than a discussion that goes awry.
So I know the beginning of that clip is not as clear. It's someone with a home video. It's actually the representative herself, Kuster, speaking, answering, reading questions from the audience. And then it clear as a voice. What about Benghazi? What are you going to say about Benghazi? What are you going to do? And then she said it's not in the Middle East, which, by the way, I guess technically in some documents it's not in the Middle East. It's actually North Africa. Take a look at maps of the Middle East and take up maps, and you can see that some people included. It looks. I think that after World War II, we did include Libya as the Middle East. I think after 1958, we stopped including it in the Middle East. We stopped with the country to its east, which is Egypt. But it'd be like saying the basic point everybody seems to be missing, even when there's articles about she doesn't know where the Middle East is and so forth. Technically, she might be right. The point is, someone has a question about Benghazi. Have you not heard it? Can you not just give us a thought on it? Why have we not caught the perpetrators? We've talked about it here in the show. Give us some answers at a town hall meeting. You mean, and then her answer is, I can only talk about the Mideast. It's be like saying someone answering questions about, the corn price in Iowa and how farmers were doing. And someone said, what about the California not potato crop they grow in California, right? The California tomato crop, the strawberry crop. And some congressman saying, I'm not here to talk about California. Like, I'm not here to talk about the corn price. Because what? The lady is totally, and then, by the way, something that never happened to me in my life, and I hope never does, you can't see who it is, but it's obvious like a staff person for the congresswoman who steps in and says, well, there's a lot of important things to do here today. The same old stuff. This goes on and on and on. And she's like powerless and helpless. In the video is just a helpless lady. There's no idea what's going on. Why wouldn't you just pick it up and say, could you tell us about Benghazi, your stance on Benghazi, what's happening, why haven't people been caught, and just say, I don't know. I'm not in that committee. I'm on the blah, blah, blah committee, and here's what I'm focused on. But that's a great question. I'm as frustrated as you are, and I'm going to talk to Congressman so-and-so who's in charge of that committee, and I'm going to get your concerns over there to be heard, even if you're not. It's been so easy to answer, but because I guess she's a Democrat, and because Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton totally screwed this up and didn't defend our people over there and put them in the wrong spot where they got killed, it seems to be, by the way, I shouldn't say it's only in America, but it goes back, Hillary Clinton's really going to run for president? With what foreign policy? Well, is all you care about in America is experience? Like I've been involved with foreign policy. It's a total abject failure. Everything she's touched, everything, from healthcare in the 90s to being the Secretary of State, where we have lost more influence between her and someone who might actually be worse, John Kerry, than ever before. Not in 1812, not in 1840s. Not the 1920s. Never before have we seen the fall of America influence and power around the world due to these two abject failures in foreign policy, our last two secretaries of state. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. Once again, we won't get to all the topics, but we'll try. We got one more break to take at LaffeyRadio.com. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
Every day, I wake up at 5 a.m. to give Dad his medicine. Every day, I wake up at 5 a.m. to give Dad his medicine. At 6 a.m., I make his breakfast. Every day, I wake up at 5 a.m. to give Dad his medicine. At 6 a.m., I make his breakfast. At 7 a.m., I shower. Every day, I wake up at 5 a.m. to give Dad his medicine. At 6 a.m., I make his breakfast. At 7 a.m., I shower. I start laundry at 8. At 10, we go for a walk. Every day, I wake up at 5 a.m.
For those dealing with the daily struggles of caring for a loved one, we hear you. That's why AARP created a community with experts and other caregivers for advice, tips, and support. Together, let's help each other better care for ourselves and the ones we love. Visit aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
This is Nnamdi Asamoah. I play football for the Philadelphia Eagles, but what I do off the field with United Way might be more important. I'm a volunteer tutor and mentor. Why? Because over 1 million kids a year drop out of school, and that's not okay. It takes 12 years to create a graduate, but it takes about the same time to create a dropout. And the difference between a child becoming one or the other could be me. Or it could be you. Studies show that if we get to these kids earlier, their chances are better. And kids who read well by 3rd grade are more likely to graduate. So join me in United Way. Suit up and take the pledge. Become a volunteer reader, tutor, or mentor. Because when a child succeeds, we all succeed. Give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Take the pledge at unitedway.org. Brought to you by United Way, the Ad Council, and the National Football League.
This is the sound of a flat-screen television hurled off a building. Now the new bike your kid wants. These are the things you could have, all cast into oblivion. Because when you throw away money on wasted electricity, you throw away everything you could have bought with it. Use Energy Star light bulbs and appliances, and you could save hundreds of dollars a year. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Energy and the Ad Council.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
China's new air defense identification zone over the East China Sea has caused significant unease in the region, Vice President Joe Biden said on Thursday, adding he had stated Washington's firm objection to the move during talks in Beijing. Biden had around 5 hours of discussions with President Xi Jinping on Wednesday, with both leaders laying out their perspective on an issue that has rattled East Asia.
The new model of great power relationship envisioned in the 21st century between China and the United States requires us to expand our practical cooperation and deliver results.
The zone, two-thirds the size of Britain, covers an area that includes islands at the heart of a territorial dispute with Japan.
Hey, Steve Laffey. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. Thanks for coming back. We've got 15 minutes left or so before the end of the show. We got a lot of topics to cover. That was Vice President Joe Biden giving a speech. He had gone over to promote trade, I suppose, like they always do. They go to China to promote trade. Basically, we have a giant trade deficit with China, and they still go over there to do this. But on the way over, or just before he went over, China, by the way, in a surprise move, it was a surprise move to just about everybody. They put up their own air defense identification zone. And by the way, that's not the same thing as the boundaries of your country. We have one in our country which extends out more than 12 miles. It's when other airlines fly in, they've got to coordinate. So, and obviously the reason you do this is that if some enemy's flying in and they don't identify themselves, it gives you some warning to rally up your planes or naval ships to get ready to defend yourself. So, but there are plenty of these identification zones, ADIZs. China has one now. They've extended theirs. South Korea has one. Japan has one. Taiwan has one, and so forth. But the mixed messages we sent by allowing, first of all, we sent B-52s up into the air after they put up the air defense identification zone, which includes these Senkaku Islands, which may have a lot of oil and gas around them, and so forth. And Japan is our ally. But the wording you just heard, and I want to repeat it because it's so important, the wording for Joe Biden is, I put my glasses on to do this one, but instead of saying we're not going to obey the ADIZ, instead of saying they better take it down, instead of saying we stand strong with Japan, and I'm here in South Korea today to and get Taiwan and South Korea, and I know South Korea has a long-standing feuds with Japan. We've got to all act together with American power to make sure China does not expand out of the area it's in today. We cannot let them control the waterways. They are a communist country, et cetera, et cetera. He didn't do any of that. He said there's a new model of great power relationship envisioned in the 21st century between U.S. and China, requires us to expound our practical cooperation and deliver results. Expand, I'm sorry, I can't read my own writing. Requires us to expand our practical cooperation and deliver results. Now, you might say, all right, he's parsing words. Maybe it wasn't so strong. I mean, maybe you're a big backer of Vice President Joe Biden and Barack Obama, who must have okayed, well, maybe not with Joe Biden, who knows. But instead, look what happens within a couple of hours in China Daily News. Let's go to China Daily News. They take his words, which should have been different, and say, it seems the hours of talks U.S. Vice President Joe Biden had with Chinese leaders last week in Beijing served their purpose, and the United States might have got the message. As he said on Friday in Seoul, South Korea, that is necessary to improve cooperation among the U.S. and Asian allies so they can get their relationship with China right. So they took this little phrase, which doesn't, in one sense, doesn't say something, in another sense says everything, and they expound upon it. They go over paragraph after paragraph now, propaganda out of China. China Daily News. This is just literally yesterday. These are positive remarks, but Washington needs to do more to match words with deeds. To shore up the spirit of cooperation, it may want to readjust its stance and seek to ease instead of ratchet up tensions like we're ratcheting up the tensions, right? Tension over China's demarcation, so they call it demarcation, of an air defense identification zone over East China Sea. In his meeting with Biden on Wednesday in Beijing, President Xi called on the U.S. to respect China's core interest in major concerns and reiterated China's principled position in establishing its ADIZ, making it clear Beijing will not back down. So here's the article where China's never backing down. We're already backing down. And by the way, it says the ADIZ should not have grabbed so much attention. There are far more important issues for Washington and Beijing to discuss. This was the highest level official contact with after the third plenary session of the 18th Central Committee of the Communist Party. Biden should have focused on helping Barack Obama administration gauge the direction of China's future development, how the U.S. can benefit from China's deepening reform. There's no reforms. This is all propaganda, but it's in the major China paper. So people read Vice President Biden's statements. They twist it around. Not even twist it. They basically, they should have had something that said, or they probably would have written an article, I suppose. Biden backs Japan. Biden backs South Korea. But it goes on. I'll give you one little more. But it is unwise for a country to unquestionably side with an ally, especially one that has developed a penchant for making trouble and provoking others, as Japan has. It was Japan that chose to provoke China over and they call it a different name, which I won't say. Senkaku is what I'd say. It's like being from the north of a Civil War battlefields or something, and right after the war. You call it the northern one, right? They call it a different one. I won't even say it. And it goes on and on. I mean, it just goes on, you know? And basically just goes after, by the way, this is unbelievable. Military alliances as the legacy of the Cold War are already outdated concept in international relations, says China Daily News. But they took it from Biden. Biden's the one, with President Obama's blessing, I'm sure, Biden's the one who allows the Communist Party to get stronger, allows China to get stronger. They see the weakness. They pounce. This is being read by millions of Chinese people and people all over the world. And that's why having a foreign policy and knowing who your allies are is extremely important. We don't under this president and this vice president. We don't know. And we're in danger because of it. You're in danger because of it over the long term as the growth of China, communist China, gets too big. Well, we get so many other topics. So I wanted to play you one other thing. Yes, we wanted to move on to I want to get one other thing before we go. We got this New York Times. Spies infiltrate a fantasy realm of online games. This comes out of documents released by the traitor Edward Snowden, who's, he fled the country. He went to China. Then he went to Russia. So Russia, see, there's so many things happening. He just stubbed it in our face, didn't he? But let's play this clip about, I don't think we can. I think I'm out of time. But I'm just going to read it to you then. I don't have time for the clip. Spies have been infiltrating a fantasy realm on online games. Basically, a national security agency has gone onto World of Warcraft and Second Life, which are fantasy worlds, which I know nothing about, and I have no idea how to get on them, and I'm not going to. The sidelight of all this article is like, who's doing this again? Millions of Americans. But they decided that they should go on the website and look for terrorists on the website because they might have language that they've developed for this website that they can go around and tell people how they're going to attack America. And they spent an awful lot of money on it. By the way, they got nobody's permission to do so. The NSA spying on everybody all the time. I thought people knew that there was a lot of spying going on. But it's another thing that's being swept under the rug. Doesn't seem like the NSA has any controls over them. No controls to this very day. We still talk about it. And maybe when you get to be president, you look at the data and you say, wow, this is incredible. You know, we've got to do something. There are dangers here and so forth. We understand that. But man, We are losing our freedom from traveling at an airport to having video games monitored by the NSA, to drones being put up in cities, to local police teams, like everybody having to have their own SWAT actions. You know, Boston was shut down over one terrorist that they found. Shut down. Everybody in their homes, like a state of martial law. Anyway, with so many more things to talk about, but this thing with China is really something that's going to heat up. And you wonder, again, I said earlier in the show, you wonder if events are getting ahead of ourselves. That, you know, I hate to talk about the word war, because I don't see a war coming at all. I just see us slipping and slipping and slipping under this administration. When things that are so obvious to kids, to little kids, about how to conduct yourself, that our administration doesn't do. And what we've covered in this show is the propaganda that comes out on all sides. It's hard to get to the truth. It's hard to find out what's going on in Ukraine today. But it's easy to know what to do about certain situations. It's easy to know that we'd be better off having a strong relationship with Japan, India, South Korea, and Taiwan to buttress what is becoming a menace. And in years to come, we will rue the day that we ignored this problem. We've ignored it now since we allowed China to enter, Communist China to enter the World Trade Organization. We will rue the day that we ever allowed this to happen, to get to the point where we are today, because they all talk among each other. China, Iran, Venezuela. I didn't even check on those local elections. I got to do that. In Venezuela, Russia, Syria. We are ceding power when we don't have to, and especially in the Ukraine today, where we could have such a positive effect, even from a statement from the president. What's Newsday Tuesday is over. Laffey Radio moves on. Look for our clips on Fixing America Presents tomorrow. Laffey Minute will be up. The Laffey Buzz is coming. We thank you for your time. Be back with another great show tomorrow. It's Steve Laffey here, checking out. Thank you so much for listening in. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Steve Laffey's Fixing America radio program on the Laffey Radio Network. Fixing America is broadcast Monday through Friday afternoons at 3 p.m. right here at www.laffeyradio.com. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or account of this broadcast without the express written consent of Laffey Network, LLC is prohibited.